Today's guest is one of the most recognizable fertility doctors in the world. But what makes her expertise and her advice so special is that she has walked the path of struggling to have a family herself. Hearing from a doctor who can empathize with what you're going through on a really personal level makes such a big difference. Today, Dr. Lucky Sekhon is here to chat about what you actually need to focus on when you're trying to conceive and what you don't need to worry about, and also how you can support yourself best throughout this whole journey. Welcome to your journey to fertility. This is the podcast that blends science with spirit to give you all the tools you need as you navigate your fertility journey. I'm your host, Jennifer Edmonds, and for the last 15 years, I've been helping women on their journeys to motherhood and beyond. I believe that combining the latest scientific research along with the best energetic and mindset practices will help you to avoid putting your life on hold and bring you closer to your baby. Each week, you'll learn ways to support your fertility and trust your body so that you can stop stressing that you'll never have your baby and finally walk your path to motherhood. This is the Your Journey to Fertility podcast. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me today, pressing play and sharing your time and your energy, because it is absolutely going to be worth your while listening to this episode. I am sure you have come across Dr. Lucky Sekhon if you are in the space of trying to conceive right now. She has some incredibly informative social media channels, and what I love about it is that the advice that she shares is always so simple and straight to the point. She debunks a whole lot of myths, and it is exactly what you need to hear sometimes amongst the noise of so much on this journey. Dr. Lucky is a Canadian reproductive endocrinologist, and she practices currently in New York City. She has guided thousands of couples by combining cutting-edge science with compassionate care to help them overcome infertility, preserve their options for the future, and build the families of their dreams. In January this year, she released her first book, The Lucky Egg, which became an instant bestseller. She currently lives in Brooklyn with her husband and her 2 daughters. In this episode today, Dr. Lucky is going to share her own personal journey to building her family, which was far from easy and far from what she expected, especially as a fertility expert. You know, she was already practicing as a doctor before she encountered fertility issues, which really took her by surprise. We also talk about what to do when you've already done everything perfectly and things still aren't working. She goes through some of the biggest myths around both female and male fertility, what you should consider when you are choosing a fertility clinic, how supporting yourself mentally and emotionally on this journey can have a huge impact on success outcomes, and what the major lifestyle factors are that consistently make the biggest difference in both natural conception and IVF. I am so honored to have her here with us today. So let's get started. Here is Dr. Lucky. I am so excited to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for making the time and coming to join us. And we have so many incredible things to speak about today, not least of all your amazing new book that has just been released. So I can't wait to get into all of that. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Can we start by learning a little bit about you? And I know that most people listening to this will be very familiar with you and the work that you do in the fertility space. But just in case anyone who's listening is new to your work, please can you let us know what it is that you do?
So I'm a double board certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinologist and infertility expert. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue.
Is it tongue twister, that one?
I'm a fertility doctor. I'm based in New York. I work at a clinic called Army of New York, and I help many people. I've treated thousands of patients at this point and helped them to build their family, to strategize, trying to preserve their fertility for the future, whether that's egg freezing or embryo freezing, and, have helped with so many different types of journeys, all of which are represented in my new book. I'm a new first-time author. I've authored things before, but most of what I did before was clinical research, which is something I'm very passionate about. But something that I learned over the years of treating patients is that there's such a huge fertility knowledge gap, which is why I wrote The Lucky Egg, which is out in the world now to help people. And that's me in a nutshell.
Amazing. Thank you. I would love to learn a little bit about your professional journey, maybe your personal journey, if you don't mind sharing, to becoming a parent as well. Because I know that there's you can choose a lot of different options when you're training to become a doctor. So what made you
Mhm.
choose fertility as a specialty?
I actually fought the, not pressure, but I would say it was very much encouraged in my family growing up. My mom was always like, if I had had the opportunities that you have, I would have gone into medicine. And, there was a lot of pressure, and I kind of was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I actually said I was going to be a writer. So it's kind of ironic now, full circle. And I remember my dad saying, you can be a writer, but like you have to have a profession and then you'll have something to write about. And I was like, whatever, dad. And I was just really trying to not give them any sort of inclination that I would go into medicine, because then I knew if I give them an inch, they'll take a mile. It's one of those things. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was really trying to go against the grain. And yet I found myself always gravitating towards, biology. I thought it was just so fascinating how the body worked. And then in my second year of undergrad or university, I was at McGill in Montreal. I had gone away for the summer to the Cleveland Clinic through a friend, a connection, and I found myself in a research program with a bunch of urologists talking about sperm and male fertility. That was the first time I ever learned about IVF and egg freezing, and I was immediately transfixed. And I just felt like it was so empowering as a woman to have options that the women generations before us did not have. And the fact that the field was moving so quickly, I found that to be so fascinating, that IVF didn't exist before the 70s. And now we're talking about changing the way we freeze and thaw eggs and embryos. And every year the success rates are getting better and there's some new technology. I just found it so inspiring. And so I kind of made a decision that that was something I was passionate about. And I didn't know how I was going to get there, but then I slowly figured it out. And I understood that I needed to go to medical school. Then I also understood that I needed to do a 4-year residency program of OBGYN training. And I tried to keep a really open mind throughout and say, if something else, is of interest to me, maybe I'll go into general surgery, who knows? But I just kept coming back to it. And then even as an OBGYN resident, I tried out all the different subspecialties and I kept an open mind and I learned about how to deliver babies, everything. But I still kept going back to it. It just was something I thought was so interesting. And I was just so, enamored by all the different like basic science aspects to understanding reproduction. Basically, I'm a huge nerd. And so I pursued it and here I am. And, something that I find really beyond just the science, interesting and that I'm passionate about is the connection to my patients. That's something that I didn't know to anticipate, but now it's like, years and years into practice, having all these really special relationships and being in such a privileged position where people are opening up their lives, their hearts, their deepest dreams and desires, and sharing that with me. Sometimes even before they share it with their closest friends or family members, even their own partner. And, I don't take that lightly. And I think it's just been such a beautiful thing to be part of so many people's journeys and help them with an area that can feel really cold and clinical and scary, and to make it just, not those things. And I'm hoping that by all the work that I'm doing on social media and writing this book, that now I can kind of extend that support and that help and guidance beyond the four walls of my clinic.
It's so lovely that you say that. I mean, if I think about, someone who's like an orthopedic surgeon or a cardiologist, I feel like they don't quite have that same connection with their patients in the way that you would, right? Because being able to build a family is the most emotional journey in the world. And I suspect most of the people that you see, they're not building their families that easily either. So thank you for saying that. I think that's a really important thing to remember. It is such an emotional journey. And it's nice to think that a doctor thinks the same thing, to be able to go on that journey with them.
I did want to answer your other question too. I only opened up about after everything was kind of resolved. And I bring that up because I think there can be a lot of pressure for people to share. And I don't think that people should feel that pressure. For me, it made sense for me to kind of get to a resolution and get to a place where I kind of processed everything. And years after I actually went through IVF is when I actually shared it with my followers and talked about it openly with my patients. I always think it's so admirable, but not something that everyone should feel pressure to do. When people do share in real time, I think that that's got to be so difficult. For me, it's like easier to kind of compartmentalize. But I basically froze embryos with my husband after we had our first child because I know everything that I know. And I actually had really unrealistic expectations when I was a medical student about how long it would take for me to train and how I would want to live my own life for some time. And I just kind of felt like I could have my whole life on a schedule. And I was so naive. And then I entered the field of fertility specifically. And it just felt like, oh my gosh, this is an epiphany that I'm seeing that, people are trying to plan things, but you can't always plan and put a finger on exactly when you're going to get pregnant and what's going to happen. And while IVF technology is great, it's not the solve for everything, and everything can be a lot more complex. So I decided that I was going to freeze embryos, and I moved up my timeline because I was in a personal place where it was something that I could do. Right. And I had the right partner, and I was like, what are we waiting for? And he was like, well, this is a different tune, because you had said like, we're going to wait till you're in your early 40s potentially. And I said, listen, I just am seeing too many things. And I just think that if we think we could be ready now, let's just do it now. And then I said, it may be difficult. Who knows? I had a low AMH, not that that matters to getting pregnant on your own, but I said, if I ultimately do need treatment, I'd rather figure that out sooner rather than later. Anyway, I didn't have trouble with baby number one, but I did make the decision because of my low AMH and knowing that I felt very overwhelmed going back to work, that I wouldn't be ready to do this again anytime soon. But it was important for me to have the ability to have a bigger family, like 2 or maybe 3 kids. So we froze embryos after I had my first, and that ended up being a harder process than I anticipated, just because I had a low response and didn't, I had a cycle that had to be canceled. Anyway, that blindsided me. And it's why I prioritize mental health in my book so much, because I thought to myself, if I couldn't anticipate how that might feel as the patient, even though I helped so many people go through that, navigate difficult cycles, then how does a person who has none of that knowledge and expertise feel? And how do we better equip them emotionally? And long story short, I was 37, 38 trying for baby number 2. And lo and behold, I had secondary infertility, which I kind of predicted might happen. And that's not the case for everyone, but it was for me. And I was really happy that I had these embryos to rely on. So that's my personal journey. And now I have 2 kids. They're 8 and 5. And I would say only when my youngest turned like 3 did I really start opening up and feeling like I could be vulnerable about this topic.
I really appreciate you sharing all of that. And it leads beautifully into the next thing I wanted to ask you, which was, there are so many fertility doctors in the world, but there are very few that share what they do and their journeys and their work on social media with such a public presence. So what made you want to start doing that? What was it that made you say, I'm sure you have so much free time, Dr. Lucky, you're like, you know what? I'm going to also spend my time educating the world. So what made you decide to start being so public about your work?
Honestly, I never intended to, and I'm going to be fully honest. I'm not a judgmental person, but I actually thought it was very cringy. When I was seeing doctors get on social media in like 2016 is when I first started noticing it. And I was like, oh, that's not for me. That seems really unprofessional. And the pandemic kind of changed everything for me. I was pregnant with my IVF baby, and, that was 2020. In March of 2020 was a very scary time in New York City. And all of a sudden, I went from being a doctor that was so busy and seeing patients in the clinic to now working from home because I was pregnant. And also we had paused cycles because it got that bad in New York for a good 3 months. Everything was paused. And I just felt very out of sorts because I'm like, my usual speed is to be in the clinic, treating patients, being hands-on and helping. And now I don't know how to help. And I'm not on the front lines and I'm not able to be. I'm pregnant right now. I need to take care of myself. I have a chronic lung disease. So I was like at higher risk than the average pregnant woman as well. And we just didn't know anything. And I thought to myself, right now I'm in a vulnerable position. I'm pregnant and I don't know anything. There's no information and we're just getting scraps of information. And I'm transfixed to my Instagram and watching all of these frontline workers sharing what they're seeing, what happens to women who are pregnant when they get COVID. And that experience really shifted me internally, because I think that I felt I needed to do something to help. And so I started creating these online webinars where I had like a high risk obstetrician, a mental health professional who I still work with till this day. She's at my clinic. Her name's Dr. Georgia Whitkin, and she's fantastic. And people showed up in droves. There were like 500 people in attendance on a webinar because women were desperate for information. And that's when I started my digital presence. And it was a very organic, like I was thrust into it because it felt like the only thing I could do safely. And I started sharing information. And then later in the year, the vaccine came out and people were so worried about whether it causes infertility. And I just felt very compelled to speak up. And I felt very passionate about it because I said, listen, if I was still pregnant right now, my baby was born safely, thank God, in August of 2020. And I was like, listen, if I was pregnant right now and it's December and the vaccine is available to me, like I would take it. And here's why. So I started talking to people a lot about that. And then all of a sudden overnight, it was like CNN and like all these big networks were coming into my house with their N95s on and they were interviewing me, because I don't think a lot of people were being super vocal in those early days, but it just didn't make sense to me. And I was going based off of what I would have done if I was pregnant, based on my expertise and my knowledge, and just using critical thinking. And I just felt like it's so hard when there isn't a perfect study to guide you. And doctors also were being, a little bit cagey about like, do we say anything? This is also so new and such new information. And that taught me something, that in situations where you don't have all the perfect data and all the answers, we still have to use our critical thinking skills to come up with the best plan, right? And it doesn't have to be evidence-based. Maybe it's evidence informed and you're just using critical thinking skills. And so I started to apply that to other things in the field of infertility that are gray areas. There are so many add-ons and gray areas because people are in desperate situations and want to do whatever they can to make their situation work out. And we're all just working sometimes with scraps of information. And how do I, as an expert, synthesize that and use social media as a megaphone to help drown out the noise and give people sound, proper guidance and information to go back to their doctor with so they can have a really educated conversation and make informed decisions for themselves. So when I tell you every single thing that has happened in terms of my public professional profile, it has just been so organic. None of it was a master plan, including writing my book. Like my book agent and my editor found me on Instagram after going through their own infertility journeys. They followed me and our worlds just kind of came together, and we were aligned in this mission of there isn't a great fertility resource written by a doctor that's accessible. And this is a problem. This is something we need to fix. And they thought I was the person that could fix it because I had helped them through their journeys unknowingly. And they were people in publishing that could help me get this information out there. And it's, again, just stumbling into the next thing and just doing whatever you think is going to help people and leading with a purpose, and the universe just kind of aligning in a way that facilitated it.
And I'm sure that so many thousands of women and couples around the world are very grateful that you are. So thank you. If I think back, I started going through IVF in 2017, and there was no one on social media, injecting themselves in real time, going through their cycles. And there's certainly, from what I can remember, there weren't any fertility doctors speaking openly. And that what you said, not knowing what you don't know is very, very hard when you are struggling to build a family. And there are so many hoops that you have to jump through before someone will perhaps take you seriously as a woman, depending on what your symptoms are. And having that knowledge and being able to take that to your doctor and say, look, tell me what you think. This is what I have seen. This is what I have read. Can we at least have a conversation about it, as opposed to going in completely blindly? So thank you for deciding or falling down the rabbit hole of sharing on social media. So when I had planned to speak to you today, I asked my Instagram following if they had any questions for you. So I've sort of compiled a few of the big things I'm sure you get asked all the time, but I would love to go through a few of them with you if you don't mind. The first
Please,
is,
yeah.
what are some of the biggest myths that you see coming up about fertility that you would love to clear up right now?
I think there is a myth that you can control a lot more than you can control. And I don't say that in a negative way. I say that in a way that should absolve you of the guilt and self-blame that I see so many of my patients experience. They often will look to the past and look at past behaviors of things that they did when they were younger, whether they used to smoke, or they drank heavily in college, or they feel like, there's got to be this magical fertility formula or supplement or superfood, and they're just not privy to that information. And so that they know, or their neighbor's friend, they were doing this crazy elimination diet, and, maybe I'm not doing it, or maybe I'm too stressed at work and I should be carving out more time in my schedule, and just placing really impossible standards on oneself. And I'm here to tell you that while being the healthiest version of yourself matters in terms of, all of the common sense things, I always say whatever's better for heart health tends to be better for fertility. I'm not saying that that doesn't matter, but the relative weight of that variable versus other variables that are well outside of our control, like our biology, our genetics, our age, those play massive roles too. And I don't want anyone who's having a difficult time getting pregnant or who's had miscarriages to put so much emphasis on what they did or they didn't do. I think we all need to just do our best. And this idea that you can live your life in a bubble and be this perfect person is a fallacy. That in and of itself is a myth, but also the idea that if you feel younger than your chronologic age, or if you are doing everything perfectly in your lifestyle, you're not going to have fertility issues. That is a myth. And we need to clear that up, because this is not your fault. This is not a meritocracy, and it does not discriminate. And it is really unfair, and it is very unlucky, right? And that's actually one of the reasons I named my book The Lucky Egg, because we've all heard the stories of people that are doing everything right. And no matter what they do, they just can't get pregnant, and they've had difficult fertility journeys. And then sometimes something really unexplained happens where in between cycles, treatment cycles are taking a break and they get pregnant on their own, right? Like everyone's heard those stories, and you don't want to bank on it or give someone false hope, but we also have every reason to feel hopeful, even when the stats are against us. And even when you are having a difficult journey, because at the end of the day, there's science, and then there's also the luck and randomness of it that we, even as scientifically minded doctors, have to acknowledge, because there's always things that you cannot explain. And there's a reason always to remain hopeful.
I find that frustrating sometimes, isn't it? We want this to be an exact science, don't we? We want the 1 + 1 = 2, and just tell me what to do, and this should equal this. And I feel like the fertility space is one of those things where there's like an element of we don't know. And I find that so hard, isn't it, when you're going into it as well? You want those answers. You want to just tell me what the answer is and I will do it. And
well,
that's
here's the thing. If you think about when you're doing one cycle to the next, right? There's so much stock we put into the protocol and the supplements we're taking and the changes we made. And I'm not saying there is no point to making those changes. There is. But you also have to factor in that every cycle that you try an IVF cycle to do an egg retrieval, you have a different limited number of eggs that have been randomly recruited from the stockpile at the core of the ovary. And it's only a small number. And it's not necessarily going to be representative in a statistical way of your overall fertility picture, your overall egg health. Some cycles are better than others, because some cycles, if you're randomly grabbing out of a bag, you're going to have a different ratio of bad to good, right? When you think about egg health, and it's not always going to make sense. I've had patients at 43 who had their eggs retrieved in a low number, like 3 retrieved and 2 turned into normal embryos, which was not at all what I had kind of prepared her for. And it's not because I'm some miracle worker. It's because there's an element of randomness in this as well. And eventually, if you accumulate enough eggs over multiple cycles, you start to see patterns that make more sense. But, I've had patients where they're like, oh, I had one cycle that was really low yield and another cycle where, shockingly 6 out of 8 embryos came back normal. And I always say it's a statistical phenomenon known as regression to the mean, meaning once you increase your sample size, then things start to make a little bit more sense. But that is a frustrating and maddening concept, especially when you think about everything that goes into an IVF cycle and how far the science has come. You're absolutely right. There are things that you just can't predict until you go through the process.
That's absolutely true. And what about male fertility? What do you see it becomes a bit of a myth about male fertility, and maybe more importantly, what do you want men and couples to know about their fertility?
I think it's shocking that a lot of people aren't fully on board with this concept of male fertility being 50% of the equation, right? It just makes sense that it is. But I think there is this bias against women in terms of whose fault it is, quote unquote, right? Because women are born with a fixed stockpile of eggs. We don't make new eggs and we don't have repair mechanisms. Whereas men are always making new sperm. Every 74 days, new sperm cells are created, and they're not the one carrying the pregnancy. So the onus just tends to be shifted from them more onto the female partner. And it's not even about where is the infertility coming from, but also the burden of treatment is more so on the female partner more often than not than the male partner. And that just has led society to kind of have this belief, this fallacy that fertility is a female problem, a woman's problem. And that's not true. 50% of the couples that I see and treat have a male factor, meaning they have problems with sperm production, quality, the ability of the sperm to swim in a forward direction or be shaped normally. And not just getting someone pregnant, it's about the quality of the pregnancy too. There's a lot of really interesting emerging research that's showing a link between male health habits that are unhealthy, chronic medical conditions that are uncontrolled, including mental health disorders, and lifestyle factors like being sedentary, obesity, different medical conditions that can actually relate to a higher incidence of complications in the pregnancy that the partner's carrying. And that's because there's a male contribution to the placenta. There are lots of paternal genes that dictate how the placenta forms. And the placenta is this magical organ that is temporary. Its main purpose is to connect the mom to the baby, and it shunts nutrients and oxygens from mom to baby. And if that is interrupted, you get growth issues, problems like preeclampsia, which happen very frequently in the third trimester, gestational diabetes, just to name a few. Even morning sickness has been linked to health outcomes in the male partner. And there's also a lot of links between health outcomes in the male partner and risk factors and future health outcomes in those children, because while men are making new sperm all the time, they are still passing some genetic mutations on through their sperm DNA to their children, mutations that are kind of accumulated with the wear and tear of aging. So men do have a biological clock. It just ticks differently than that of women's. And it's really important for them to be putting their best foot forward and being tested concurrently with their partners.
Thank you. Can we just scream this one from the rooftops more and more, I think? Do you find that, do you find, how do I put this, but are not all fertility doctors putting the same emphasis on men as potentially they could be? I find a lot of the women that I work with, it does seem to always come back. There is so much more testing done on the woman. And what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I do still see that. I see this kind of tendency to say, well, we're doing IVF, so it doesn't really matter. And I think it does. And I think that we do need to be having stronger conversations with both partners present and saying, it's not okay if she's doing the bulk of the work in trying to clean up lifestyle and do things differently. And I'm taking your history and you're telling me you're still vaping and you're consuming nicotine and you're drinking heavily. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of progress, but I think that there is frustration from a lot of women that conversation is not being had in such a strong way that it should be. Really, it's not to lecture anyone, but it's to say, hey, we're trying to do the best that we can, and both partners need to show up and bring their A game. And there's an opportunity, right? It's a wasted opportunity to just throw up our hands and say, oh, well, we're doing IVF anyway, so we're just going to inject the sperm into the egg. It doesn't matter. First of all, the science doesn't suggest that that's true. I think it does matter because you see it in embryos getting past day 3. Some of that drop off in nutrition is not because of egg quality. It's because of sperm DNA fragmentation and other issues with the sperm that might not even be apparent on a regular semen analysis. The semen analysis is very limited. You're not always going to get all the information that's there. And I've seen patients with no reason, because the female partner is young, she's in her 20s or early 30s, and she has a good egg count. And there's an unexplained sharp drop off, and it may be a male factor still, even though there's enough sperm to inseminate the eggs. That's not the end all be it all. And so I do think this idea of, well, it doesn't matter because we're bypassing the sperm quality issues. that needs to go out the window, because I think everything that you can do, you could actually see meaningful changes in sperm quality starting at 60 to 90 days, because that's how long it takes for you to kind of clean house and get a new set of sperm. And why wouldn't you? It's such a huge emotional, financial, physical investment that your partner and you are going through. It really makes sense to do your best to really hit the ground running and bring your A game.
Well, my next question, I think will lead it from that beautifully, and we'll put that at the top of our list. But what would you say that people should consider or be aware of when starting fertility treatments or choosing a fertility doctor? What are the biggest things they should keep in mind?
There was actually a great paper that came out within the past 5 years, I believe, that looked at key characteristics associated with better success rates in IVF clinics. And it's something that I allude to a lot in the chapter of my book, where it's all about questions to ask at that first visit and how to choose between multiple clinics. If you're someone who's lucky enough to live in a city where you have multiple clinics to choose from, not everyone does. But I think, everyone has a different system when you're talking about different countries. In America, we have Society for Assisted Reproductive Technology. It's an organization, it's a third party that basically can audit different clinics. And if you're a member of SART, you're basically subject to audit, and you have to submit your data in a very specific way. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that when you look at clinic websites, that's kind of marketing. That's not vetted, right? And anyone can kind of make the numbers look a certain way. Like if you say, what is your pregnancy rate, but you're only looking at those who did an embryo transfer, well, that's going to be a really inflated pregnancy rate, because it's not accounting for the woman that did an IVF cycle and didn't have an embryo to transfer. So SART, and there's other regulatory bodies in Canada that are similar. And in the UK, they have their own as well. So wherever you are located, find out what the equivalent of that is. And that's a good place to start, because at least then you're comparing apples to apples, because the data has to be reported in the same way. And at least they're subject to audit. So it's going to be honest reporting, one would hope. And if you're looking at clinics within the same region, your assumption can be, okay, the patients are all similar, right? Because there could be variations, regional differences in who seeks care and what type of problems they are dealing with. But if you're looking within the same geographic area and you're comparing, success rates in a relative sense, that might kind of give you an indirect indicator of the IVF lab quality. And that paper that I was referencing, that I cite throughout this chapter, that's not something that you can easily Google, right? I break it down. Higher volume clinics tend to have better success rates. And I know that's a controversial statement, because along with that might come a feeling of like not having personalized care. So it's like there's a give and take here. But I do think when we're prioritizing clinics, I don't think there's enough of an emphasis on, well, what kind of success rates can the IVF lab offer? Because I think it's important that you like me as your doctor and you feel comfortable and you like the nurses and you like the way the clinic is. But at the end of the day, I'm not the one handling your eggs or injecting the eggs with sperm or cultivating them to the embryo stage. I'm not the one controlling the quality in the laboratory environment. And I think the more procedures you tend to do, whether you're talking about trying to find a surgeon, like if you were getting any type of surgery done, would you rather go to the surgeon that does 10,000 cases a year or only 50 cases a year? Right? It's kind of common sense in the world of surgery that the more surgeries a person does, the lower their complication rate and the better their success rates. And I think the same is true. I view the procedures that the embryologists do on eggs and embryos as microsurgical procedures, right? You're working with your hands, and it's not robots, it's humans. And the more they do, the better they tend to be. And I also think this is controversial, but I'm just going to say it because I already put it out there in the book. Clinics that do a lot more cases, typically it's an exercise in futility if they were trying to avoid the weekends, right? They'd be like, we have so many egg retrievals every day that we're just prepared and staffed appropriately to do them even on the weekend. So where I work, it's a big clinic, and I can't work in a smaller clinic personally, because unless it was somehow financially feasible to have it open 7 days a week and to be able to do procedures 7 days a week, because the nature of an egg retrieval is we do it whenever your body is ready. and trying to push it an extra day or two to just avoid the weekend because I don't have embryology staff on the weekends or an anesthesiologist to come in on the weekends, or only being open for certain months of the year because you have, so few patients. That's not ideal personalized care. And those types of differences in timing can make a huge difference to your overall outcome. So it's an uncomfortable truth, but I already put it out there. And it's probably the thing I'm most nervous about in my book, because I don't know that everyone wants me to say that, but it's the honest truth. And if I was talking to a friend or a family member who is going through IVF, I basically went through an exercise. I'm only telling you like some of the top things, but where you can go through the list of this is what I would ask. And these are red flags that I would actually think twice about going there. What are some antiquated practices? If they're so ready to put back multiple embryos at a time, or they're so ready to, do things that are kind of no longer considered the standard of care because the science is advanced, it should make you question what else are they not up to date on, right? And this is not to sow seeds of doubt or to make you feel suspicious of your clinic, but it's to help you be someone who is in the know from someone in the know, and to do right by yourself, because, we don't have an endless timeline and an endless supply of, cycles that are going to be covered by insurance. And I think it's really important to move forward in a way with confidence, feeling hopeful, and also feeling secure that whatever decisions you're making the best possible decision in that moment. You're not going to look back and have regrets about something that's really time sensitive.
I thank you for sharing all of that. And it makes such perfect sense, doesn't it, when you say, well, your body is ready for the egg collection, but no, we can't do it because it's a Sunday. I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait until Monday. And you do hear about this happening still so much, you're right, in more regional areas, and when there aren't these big clinics that have the capacity to do that. And you do wonder how much it is impacting on patients. So I think that people need to hear that. So thank you for putting that out there. You've touched a little bit a few times on the emotional impact that this journey takes on couples, especially women, but on couples. How much do you think that being emotionally supported throughout the journey has an impact on success outcomes?
I mean, I think it's huge. And that's an area also of improvement that we need to see as a field. I posted recently online about Jennifer Aniston finally coming forward years after she was already out of her journey, right? And she's processed it, and she's shared with everyone that, hey, I'm someone that went through this process and tried, and it didn't work for me. And that was really, really difficult. And that opened up a whole conversation with my community online. And I hear this resounding theme of, yeah, there's a lot of us. And where is the emotional support for us? Where is, once you're out of the clinic, you're kind of left to your own devices. And I think that that's a huge miss and a huge gaping hole, an opportunity for us to really improve. And I wish that more IVF clinics would have built-in mental health support, because this is such a mental health journey, right? First of all, we've talked about it many times in this short conversation about how IVF is more of a marathon than a sprint for so many people. And what gets in the way of people getting to their desired outcome, there's a lot of different things. But the saddest thing that I find really heartbreaking is when it's solely because of burnout. When I believe as a medical professional, like, this is a patient that can be successful, it's just a matter of getting there. And I know that from instinct and from my experience. And they can't do it because there's a mental block, because they've suffered so much trauma and they don't feel supported. And it's just taking such a toll on them mentally. And that is something that there's no excuse for that, right? Like, we should know now, after years and years of people talking about infertility and treating patients with infertility, what an emotional and mental toll this can take. And I think I've learned, so much good information from all of the different disciplines that I interface with. I take a multidisciplinary approach to patient care. We have an in-house mental health team, and I've worked with the same clinical psychologist for years. And, she helps our patients navigate difficult pivots and decisions and wrap their head around things like if they're thinking about donor egg or donor sperm or surrogacy, if they're just having a hard time dealing with failed cycles, because I'm not a mental health expert. I've definitely learned a lot from working with them, and I infused so much of that into my book. And one of the things that I think is really different about my book, that I felt not only was there a need for a doctor written resource that kind of is like a fertility Bible that encompasses everything you could possibly need to know, that is also inclusive of solo parenthood by choice, because that's not really represented a lot in the literature that's out there on fertility. It's very much like man and woman want to have a baby, right? What about same-sex couples? They from the get-go are at a disadvantage in that they need treatment, and that can be, there can be a lot of barriers. But the mental health component, I think, is what makes this book very different, and something that I try to lead within my practice that I think has allowed me to better help patients, because you can't go at this alone, and you need tools to build resilience. You need tools to not just worry about, I'm going to get to my destination and I'm going to arrive there in tatters and just whatever, at least I got to my destination. There's so many people that have gotten to their happy ending, but they're not happy because they're dealing with the unresolved trauma and the grief, and everything in that baggage doesn't go away. I mean, I want to be clear that in my experience, longitudinally following so many patients, I see a massive difference between the patients that have prioritized their mental health, that when I recommend they speak to a psychologist or they speak to a therapist, they are actually like, okay, I'm on board, and they're partners in that, versus the person that is like, that's a waste of my time, I'm not going to do it. It's like so much easier to withstand the journey if you arm yourself with all of the resources. And something that I see happen a lot, and I went through it myself, is an underestimation of what the mental health toll may be. And it's so much better if you over prepare than under prepare. And I think what people don't realize is that while they may think that they're type A and they're focusing on their goal, taking a moment for your mental health throughout this process is going to actually help you get to your goal. Not just get to your goal, but also get there with your sense of self intact, with your relationships more likely to be intact, and really having, good quality of life on the way there, because it could take time. And that's why I say, take the trip, take time to smell the roses. I know it's easier said than done, but there are pockets of time that your doctor and your clinic can work with you to say, all right, so what? You're going to get your period and you're going to be on this short family trip. Don't skip the trip. Go on the pill. If you don't want to waste the whole cycle, then just get off the pill when you get back, and then we'll do it then. I've insisted on people taking trips with their family that they were prepared to cancel because they thought they weren't dedicated enough if they were going to go and take this pause. And I'm like, 2 weeks is not going to change the game. 1 month is not going to change the game. And they come back from their trip and they're like, thank God I went. I feel so much better. I'm so happy that I did that.
I feel like this is a whole podcast conversation in itself, just the mental health aspect of everything. And it's exactly what you said. I had this conception that I would get the 2 pink lines, or I would get the baby and I would be magically fixed. And the trauma of this journey is not erased by having the baby. And I really, really would love people to hear that. So thank you for sharing. Before we get into a little bit more about the book, the last thing I wanted to ask that came up a lot from my followers was, of the hundreds and thousands of patients that you have seen over your career, are there things, or is there like a couple of main things that you notice that those who are successful do that really puts them ahead of those who don't?
Yeah. So we talked about it already, but I think taking care of your mental health and making a concerted effort to over communicate with your partner and be partners together in this, instead of just kind of assuming that, oh, through thick and thin, we'll be fine. No, I think the people that really take a concerted effort to protect themselves and protect their relationships and are really aware that those are things that can kind of go awry or buckle under the pressure of all of this, I see a huge difference in who can actually stick with it and get to the finish line versus those that can't. From a physical health standpoint, I think those who prioritize the right things early on and are super proactive and focus on the things that make a difference versus getting burnt out on the things that don't. I think it's really hard to be practical in a world filled with noise, but we already talked about the importance of the clinic you choose in the IVF lab. And so if you're someone who needs to go down the route of IVF, because obviously you may be doing IUIs, maybe that's not as much of a consideration. But even that, I think making sure you're going to a clinic that is super efficient. Because something I hear a lot of when I've seen second opinions is then they said to do the testing, and then I had to wait a whole month for the testing, and then I had to wait another 4 weeks to get the doctor's appointment. And then they made me wait till my next period. And then I came in for testing. I don't really know why I kept coming in for blood work. Lots of wasted time. And I think that you need to make sure that your care team is being as efficient with your time as you need them to be. And it's hard. It's like, how do you prioritize that? But I think asking questions, which I've listed out in that chapter about how to kind of suss out which clinic to go to, asking really clear questions about expectations and timeline early on, I think can help you get a sense of how efficient your journey may be with this particular clinic. And I think understanding from the get-go things like, how do you get in touch with your doctor or your care team with follow-up questions, right? Those are regrets that I see people have when they come to me for second or third opinions and they're talking about their previous experiences. So I think going into it with clear expectations, knowing what to expect as much as you possibly can, there's always going to be some unknowns, but that's going to make you feel more confident and comfortable and more sure in your journey. And then being really efficient again with testing. Like it drives me nuts when I hear of a couple where one person does the genetics and then we wait 3 weeks for the results and then their partner gets tested because they found out they're a carrier. It's like, maybe it's for cost reasons sometimes, but I just test both at the same time. I'm like, that way in 3 weeks, like we're good to go. We have all of your test results. Don't just test the female partner and then say, if there's not a problem, then we're going to do the semen analysis. That doesn't make any sense. 50% of couples have a male factor, as we said. So just being really thoughtful and complete about the testing. Like, don't start doing inseminations without having an HSG. How do you know that your tubes are both open? And the worst thing that can happen is someone going through multiple rounds of something and then figuring out, oh, if we had done this test, I wouldn't have even gone down this path. It could have saved you so much heartache. It could have saved you certain complications, like things like miscarriage or ectopic pregnancies, just going back to that example specifically. But I just think that we need to be smart. Just what would, I think about what would I want for my friend or family member where I have a vested interest. I have a vested interest for all my patients. And I just want people to go to a doctor and a care team that has that same sense of urgency and is treating it like that. Are they doing things in a way that's methodical, efficient, complete, and are your concerns being addressed? And from an early stage, being a partner in your journey, like not just blindly following recommendations. It's good to trust your doctor, but there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I need to understand what I'm taking, what pills I'm taking, what I'm injecting. It's just good to know, it's going to make you feel better and more in control and less anxious and able to withstand and stay in the journey until you get to your finish line.
Well, the type A in me just loves that answer so much, the efficiency and the not faffing around and the waiting. And you're right, it doesn't make a lot of sense sometimes. And it becomes really frustrating and adds to the stress load of what you're going through. And it's so unnecessary. And I love that you pointed that out. Can we talk about the lucky egg? Now, there are a lot of fertility books around these days, and from experts and experts in inverted commas and everything in between. Yes. So what made you decide to write the book, and how is it a little bit different to others in the space?
Yeah. So as I said, with everything else in my journey, I kind of stumbled into this. But it happened at a very natural time in my career as a content creator. So obviously I'm a doctor, but something that I've been doing since COVID, since 2020, has been using social media as a megaphone. When I see a problem, I address it, and now I'm addressing it for the masses, right? And usually a lot of my content is like, oh, there's a news headline that's over sensationalizing this scientific breakthrough, and now everyone thinks like this unrealistic thing is possible. And I'm getting asked a ton of questions about it from my patients or from my followers. They're DMing me, and that will guide what I'm going to make my next video on. I don't have a social media schedule. People ask me this all the time. They're like, do you plan it out? No, I'm flying by the seat of my pants. Literally, I'm so busy seeing my patients, being a mom, and I just see something and I say something and I turn on my camera and record it, like before clinic or after clinic. And then I edit it on the subway ride home. And that's all I have time for. And I think that's gotten me very far in terms of being able to actually make an impact. I know that it helps people, but it's very fragmented and it's just flying at them in a very haphazard way, because quite honestly, that's how I'm creating the content. It's kind of like addressing whatever flavor of the month question is coming up that is, kind of a plague on society that I need to clear up and say, this is not true. And I feel like it doesn't give people the comprehensive 360-degree education that they truly need to fully understand. And I get frustrated sometimes because I'll like address something really specific, and then there's a lot of new followers in the comments that are like, but wait, like, why it doesn't AMH cause infertility? Like, blah, blah, blah. Like, and I'm like, oh, they haven't gone through my whole grid and found all those other videos. And even though I've addressed these things, and sometimes I address different topics 5 different ways, 5 different times, but it's just like, it goes on the grid and then it kind of just like falls off and people forget. And I just felt frustrated by that limitation of social media. There is no index. And even if you go on Google and search at lucky.sekhon low AMH, it's like you might find some videos, but it's not a comprehensive way to really look up things. And the number of DMs I get with people are like, do you have a video on this? Can you send it to me? I was like, there has to be a better way. And so that's when I started thinking, maybe I do need to write a book, because that would address this problem. I could have an index. I could start with the basics, because like the first third to half of the book is really for everyone. Like I would love nothing more than it to become like a cultural phenomenon that everyone reads this as they turn like 21, right? Because they're like, okay, this is health class 2.0. This is what we should all just know about our body and how to really think about our menstrual cycles and just like things. That way, if they're ready to start trying to get pregnant, now they have a manual that teaches them how to track their cycle and what prenatal to go on and what to prioritize about fertility, lifestyle changes. And then if they run into problems, there's also the second half of the book, which is like, okay, where to find experts and when to seek help. And what are the different testing options that are actually legitimate? Like everyone should have these tests done. And then what are these specific scenarios where like, here's the list of tests, here's the list of tests. And it's like, not the same as if you were to Google that, where you'd be like, oh, who's saying this? Does it even make sense? Like conflicting information everywhere. This is like evidence-based, coming from an expert that's actually helped thousands of people get pregnant. And then it's also walking you through all the different treatment permutations in the IUI category, right? If you're trying to just get your ovulation to be regular, or you have a male factor or sexual dysfunction, and IUI, even without medications, could make sense. All the different things. Then it's like IVF, and what is embryo grading? What is PGT? Why does it matter? And embryo transfer, what are all the different protocols? And then for the people who have been in the trenches who are like, I already know all that stuff, what do you do if you have transfers that fail, or you can't get normal embryos, or you can't get to retrieval? Troubleshooting. And here are all the add-ons, and here's what we know about them. Here's the whole menu of them. Here's some that have scraps of information or nothing at all and are potentially dangerous. Here are the ones that maybe are worth trying, and here's what the data shows. So it's just giving you the information in a curated way that's easy to understand, so that you can be armed with all the information. Because a lot of times people don't know the denominator. They're like, oh my God, there's 50,000 different treatment options, when really there's not that many. It's just like discrete categories. And I break it down in such an easy to understand way that should really make everyone on a level playing field feel much more in control, as much as they can, in a process that's largely out of their control.
That's such a wonderful explanation of just having the manual, having the toolkit that probably we should have learnt the first third or half of your book when we were in high school, but we don't. Yeah. So we have to learn it somehow. And I wish I had learnt all of these things a lot earlier than I did. And I learned it the hard way. So having a book like this would have been amazing. So thank you for putting it out there into the world and available for everyone. And those who don't have access to incredible doctors like yourself, it's wonderful to have this resource. So Dr. Lucky, where can people learn more about you and connect with you? If they just want to, if they want to buy the book, if they want to connect with you more personally, what's the best way to do that?
Well, I'm on Instagram at lucky.sekhon, Sekhon. I have a website by the same name. I've had it since COVID, luckyegg.com. And what's interesting about that is you're going to find a lot of good information that's longer form blog style, where I explain things very in depth. But there's also a lot of tools. There's like an egg freezing calculator, an IVF due date calculator. There's even an embryo grading sorting tool. These are all tools that I think can provide something that just reading an article or watching a video post can't necessarily do for you, because you can actually interact with it, and it's very practical. And I hope that it helps make people's journeys easier. My book is everywhere. It's international, and you can find it in any of your local bookstores, big or small. You can find it on Amazon. And my link on my Instagram and on my blog is geotagged. So if you click on that, it will take you to wherever books are sold in your area. And it was adapted for the UK as well, with very slight differences, but it was anglicized, so to speak, because things are done differently in different parts of the country. But it's really available to everyone. And I hope it helps so many people, because that's really the purpose of why I wrote this. And now I'm in this magical phase of actually getting the feedback from people and hearing, what their thoughts and first impressions are. And it's so surprising to me how quickly people are reading it. So the fact that they're saying they can't put it down makes me feel good, because I didn't want this to be cold and clinical and heavy and feel like reading a textbook. I wanted it to feel like you have a best friend who just happens to be a reproductive endocrinologist who's there to help you every step of the way.
Thank you. I will be sure to link up all of those in the show notes. And Dr. Lucky, on behalf of myself and the thousands of women and couples that you have helped all around the world, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. And I'm such a fan of your content, by the way. You're like one of the best creators in this space. So thank you for everything that you do. I love following you, and it's been such a privilege to be on your show.
Oh, thank you. I so appreciate that. Thank you for being here and listening right to the end of this episode. And thank you to everyone who recently reached out over my Instagram stories to submit questions for her. So I hope we got through as many as we possibly could. Now, if you have found this episode helpful, I would love it if you could share it with someone who may also be struggling. You also never know who might need to hear some of this information. So share it where you can. And I would love to know your feedback. I do have a voice note channel, as well as my emails, my DMs are always open. So if there is a guest or a topic that you would like covered, please do not hesitate to let me know. And the links to all of those are down in the show notes. Now, next week on the podcast, I am sharing the exact steps I would take if I wanted to get pregnant this year. This will be everything you need to know and exactly where to start if you are feeling lost. So until then, I am sending you all of my wishes as you continue your own journey to fertility. The most common thing I hear from students who are on their fertility journey is that the stress of trying to conceive has taken over their life. Your days end up being filled with endless appointments, navigating pregnancy announcements. You're trying to eat right, take all your supplements, and it is all you think about from the moment you wake up. I designed the Element Fertility Yoga course to support your body, your mind, and your mental health in 3 important ways: to synchronize your hormones, increase circulation and blood flow, and to help regulate your nervous system. But on top of this, the greatest gift that you can give yourself throughout this journey is a sense of peace, to help you calm your mind and just make this process feel easier. Every single one of my students tell me that this is the first thing they notice after starting a yoga, meditation, and breathwork practice. But on top of this, you have the amazing benefit of actually supporting and increasing your fertility. Studies have shown that those participating in mind-body programs as they're trying to conceive have success rates 3 times greater than those who don't. The course I've designed walks you through natural conception as well as fertility treatments and IVF cycles. And the best part is you can work through it at your own pace in the comfort of your home. The practices start from just 10 minutes per day. To learn more, visit elementpilatesyoga.com or see the link in the show notes.